We're into the study on the Song of Solomon, which we're calling the Song of Love. This particular lesson I'm calling a selfish dreamer. And we take our text from Song of Solomon, the 3rd chapter, beginning with verse 1 through verse 5. By night on my bed I sought the one I love. I sought him, but I did not find him. I will rise now, I said, and go about the city. In the streets and in the squares I will seek the one I love. I sought him, but I did not find him. The watchmen who go about the city found me. And I said, have you seen the one that I love? Scarcely had I passed by them when I found the one that I love. I held him and would not let him go until I had brought him into the house of my mother, into the chamber of her who conceived me. I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the does of the field, that you do not stir up nor awaken love until it pleases. I'm calling this a selfish dreamer. A selfish dreamer simply because it is a dream setting here. And we are not sure exactly if this was a reality or if it was only a dream that she experienced. But this is the setting that is given. And so I call it a selfish dreamer. By night on my bed, I sought the one that I love. I sought him, but I did not find him. Now, if you understand Song of Solomon, it is divided into 6 different songs. This is the end of the 2nd song. That goes through chapter 2, verse 8, chapter 3, verse 5 is the 2nd song in the Song of Solomon. And it is explaining this lonely experience that she had. Now, what we might say here is that loneliness is a universal experience of all lovers. It is impossible to love someone and not be lonely sooner or later. I was laughing at a young pastor that was with me on a trip to Mexico recently that he and his wife had never spent more than one day apart in their marriage. And one of my friends, this year marks 49 years that Evelyn and I have been married, but I've had friends say, you've not been married 49 years. You've been gone from home so much, you've only been married 10 years. And that comes back, Evelyn understands what it means being a preacher's widow. Because I certainly have spent a lot of time on the road and having to travel in my teaching. So loneliness, that's what she's describing here, a lonely experience. And it's a universal thing. Let me break this down into 2 or 3 parts so you can remember what I'm going to say. Let's talk first of all about a sleeping lover, a sleeping lover. Now, in reality, whether this is a dream or not really doesn't make any difference, because the essence is talking about loneliness or a separation. Now, if you remember in the previous lesson, it was where he invited her to come and walk with him on the mountains, and she declined to do so. She did not follow him, and that part of the song ends there in chapter 2 in the last verses when she talks about, come to me on the mountains of Bether. Well, the word Bether literally means separation. So it shows there's something that's come between them. There's this lonely experience, and it is a part of every human relationship. She says, by night on my bed, I sought the one that I love. I sought him, but I did not find him. Now, the truth is, nighttime really isn't a negative experience if we are with those whom we love. When nighttime becomes a negative experience is when we are alone and we're separated from the people that we care most deeply about. Now, I understand this perfectly. I've teased my friends a lot of times when we're traveling. How did you sleep last night? Oh, I slept well. I slept like a baby. I cried all night. Because people think that traveling, that is some kind of romantic idea or such. Only if you're traveling with those that you love. When you're traveling alone, I hate that time. I hate it because it's just another old empty room. But if you're with those that you love, then nighttime really isn't a bad experience. It's a negative experience in this situation because it's nighttime and something has happened in their relationship. She has failed to follow him. Now listen to me carefully. I want to apply this in a spiritual setting. This is what I have experienced in my relationship with God. I find that when God challenges me to come walk with him on the mountains, he challenges me to follow him in some act of faith, and for whatever reason, I fail to do so. God never comes down to my level and argues with me. Now, I think we can learn in our own marriage relationships that is not a good solution to the problem. When someone doesn't follow, the best thing to do is just back off a little bit, give them a little bit of room. And that's what God does. He doesn't come down to your level and argue with you or fight with you, fuss with you. No. What does he do? He just backs off a little bit. He stops talking to you. And suddenly, you're praying, but you might as well be talking to the wall. You try to read your Bible, but you might as well be reading a newspaper because it doesn't talk to you anymore. What's happened? You're like the sleepy lover that failed to follow him, and now she experienced the loneliness being without his presence. Let's look at the second part of this lesson. The second part is what I'm going to call a seeking lover. In this second part, you find her as she makes a decision, I'm going to look for him. Now, that was a wise choice. And I would encourage you, when you realize that you have made a mistake, either in your relationships with one another, your relationship in your marriage, even your relationship with your children, or your relationship with God, one of the wisest things you can do is to decide, I'm going to change this. I'm not going to allow this to continue the direction that it's going. I'm going to go seeking for him. Now, here's the warning that I will give you, that I see so clear in this picture, what I'm calling a seeking lover. It's impossible for love to develop properly in a relationship if one of the lovers is too possessive. We use the word control. Now, the truth of it is, nobody likes to be controlled. Nobody enjoys that. God didn't create us that way. God created us to be intelligent individuals that make choices. That's why he gives us a will, so that we can choose. But when someone comes into our lives that tries to control us, I don't know about you, I hate that. I will back away from that very quickly when I realize people are trying to manipulate me, trying to dominate me. I understand. That's witchcraft. That's not God. That's witchcraft. That's exactly what the devil tries to do to us. He wants to control our lives. He wants to dominate our lives. He wants to manipulate our lives. That's the devil. That's not God. In this situation, we can see her problem is, and I'm not saying that she's deliberately trying to practice witchcraft, but it is a spirit of witchcraft. She probably, in her own insecurity, immaturity, is trying to control him. And you're going to see that very clearly here in a moment. That's a mistake. That is a mistake. And I really believe it is one of the major reasons why people spiritually never develop a close relationship with God. You know why God doesn't speak to some people? Because they never listen. They're never listening. I believe that God does speak. But it's just like this room is filled with voices right now. This room is filled with pictures right now. And if we had the right receiver, we could tune into that frequency and hear that voice. The same is true with God. God, it's not that he's not speaking, it's we're not listening. That's what happened to this young woman. And so by trying to control him, and that really is foolish, isn't it? I mean, he is the king. She was just a simple shepherd girl. And here the king has fallen in love or is attracted to her, and now she's trying to control him. Oh, my. Have you ever tried to control God? We call it praying. We try to tell God what he needs to do. Now, if you will just come down here and take care of this problem, and we'll tell him exactly what he needs to do, then that's really not a good way for us to develop a spiritual relationship, is it? This is what we call playing hide and seek. See, it's not the little kids that's the only ones that play this game. Lovers play this game. And particularly in the courtship stage, and that's where they are in their relationship here, it's a give and take. And so he's come looking for her. She hides from him. Why do we do that? There's a lot of different reasons. As I mentioned, a lot of it is immaturity. Insecurity can be the same thing, that we find this impulsiveness to want to control. Be careful with that. Be careful for that. Because the truth of it is, we're not in a position to tell God what to do. And we're not even in a position to tell other people. We can give them advice and counsel, but the last decision is theirs. Now listen to her words. She said, I said, have you seen the one that I love? Now, that sounds very nice. It sounds romantic. But it leads me to the third point that I want to emphasize in this story. What I'm going to call a selfish lover. A selfish lover. It becomes quite obvious this woman is preoccupied with herself. The one statement that is repeated 4 times in these short 5 verses is, the one I love. Now, I keep referring not only to the marriage relationship, but also spiritual relationship. A lot of people try to do the same thing with God. Have you ever heard anybody sing the song, and I'm going to date myself here, but me and Jesus, we got our own thing going? Oh, now wait a minute. What are you talking about, me and Jesus? Since when do you put me in front of Jesus? That's wrong. That is a mistake. Or I've seen people that they used to use these little placards they would put on their cars, these little tags. They went, God is my co-pilot. What's a co-pilot? A co-pilot, that's somebody that takes over when the pilot gets tired. Would you relieve me for a little while I, go get me a cup of coffee or something? And no, that's a wrong relationship for us and God. We're not in a position to tell God what to do. Well, looking at their marriage relationship, she keeps saying, the one that I love. And it sounds spiritual, but it's really not spiritual. It sounds romantic, but it's not romantic. It is selfish because she is trying to control the relationship. Listen to her words. She uses the personal pronoun I 17 times in these 5 verses. She repeats it again and again and again. She uses the word my twice. She uses the word me twice. Do you see who she's talking about? She thinks she's talking about him, but in reality, she continues to refer to herself again and again and again. Now listen to me carefully, because I see this happen. I see couples that at one time were very close to each other, but one of them tries to control. One of them thinks they know everything, and you can't tell them anything. you know what's going to happen. If you want to control, you want to do all the talking, what happens? The other person just gets quiet. If you try to control, what does the other one do? They withdraw. That is just human nature, because nobody wants to be anybody's slave. Nobody wants to be controlled by others. Now, with the babies, with the little guys, of course we tell them what to do because they're in that stage of immaturity, of being developed. But I've seen parents try to treat their teenage children like they're 4-year-olds. It will not work. In fact, the truth of it is, the only people that will submit to that kind of control are weak, insecure people. Anyone that has intelligence, they use their mind to think. Anyone that has their own will and they want to make some decisions, they're going to have difficulties when someone tries to control them. I hate to admit it, but I've even seen that kind of thing happen in churches. I've seen that thing happen in government, where somebody tries to control and becomes like a dictator. Now, as she's saying this, I held him and I would not let him go until I had brought him to the house of my mother. I mean, it is obvious this young woman is very immature and selfish. Now, I'm thankful that's not where the story ends. It's just where it begins. It's a part of those early courtship days. But she's got a lot to learn about human relationships. I want to control. In other words, she's trying to lead. Listen to me, ladies. God created men to be leaders. Now, I understand. Some ladies are actually more intelligent than their husbands. I understand that. I've seen that. But you know what the really smart woman will do? She comes up with the idea, but she plants it in his mind and makes him think it's his idea. Now that's really being smart, because she knows how to promote him in that way. She knows, and people say, well, he shouldn't be that way. Now, let me tell you, men have very fragile egos, very fragile egos. And you can wound them in that sense. And it's more than just a cliche. If a man cannot be a man at home, he will try to be one somewhere else. I've discovered as being a pastor that many of the problems that I had to deal with in the church were really not church problems. It was a marriage problem. It was a family problem that they were bringing into the church because things weren't operating the way God intended for them to operate. She's trying to lead in this situation. She is not being submissive at all. Now, I'm going to chalk it up in her case to immaturity. That's where I think the majority of it comes in her situation. It's just simply immaturity. It's not because she was not intelligent. No, she's insecure, immature, and so she's trying to take control of it. And so she's wanting to bring him back in the past. She's wanting to I want to bring him back to my mama's house. Why? Because it's quite obvious in her mama's house she was somebody, the princess, somebody very special there. And so that's where she wants to take him. And she is not being submissive. She's trying to control the relationship. And that is ultimately a mistake, because no man is going to want to be in that position. The thing that amazes me in this story is when she finds him, he follows her. Now, why would he do it? I think it's part of this hide-and-seek game, the give and take that happens between lovers, that he follows her back to her mother's house. Why? Because he loves her enough, he's going to give her another chance. He loves her enough, and he sees something that's very special in her, even though she's trying to control, she's immature, and I think he can understand that. But he understands, oh, Have you ever experienced that in your relationship with God? That we try to control God or try to tell God what he's supposed to do. And what happens? He gives us another chance. Why would he do it? Because he loves us that much. And I see in their relationship, that's what happens here. Because of his love for her, he allows her to lead in this situation. Now, I think that shows great security within him. And I would challenge all you men to follow that example. That's a good example. Oh, yes, maybe she did disappoint you. Maybe, but there's something special there. There's something that attracted you. Give her another chance. Give her another opportunity. And so we find when she does discover him, she said, I held him. I brought him back to my mother's house. Now, she doesn't realize how immature that she's acting, but he gives her this chance. Now, I challenge you with this thought. One of the worst things in life is getting our own way and then living to regret it. Has God ever answered a prayer for you that you wish he hadn't? It's a humorous story, but I had a friend, a missionary in Central Africa, and he was infatuated with elephants. And he said, I was even praying, God, give me an elephant, And one day somebody came by, they had an old circus elephant, and they gave it to him. And he said, I was so happy because God had answered my prayers and my elephant. And he said, but do you realize how much an elephant eats? Do you realize what a big mess elephants make? And I've got to clean this up every day. And he said, it wasn't too many months until I was praying, oh, God, just let this elephant die. Now, see, I think all of us have done that. Have you ever prayed that God would help you buy a car that turned out to be a lemon? Wow, I think we've all made those mistakes, haven't we? That's what's happening here in her situation, and she's going to discover that. She's going to mature and outgrow it. But one of the worst things that you can get in life is getting what you want and then discovering that's not what you wanted. Like the young man they heard praying, he was afraid Jesus was going to return before he got married, and he was praying, please, Jesus, just wait a little longer. I want to get married first. Wait until I get married. Don't come back before I get married. And then he got married. 6 months later, they hear him praying, and he's saying, even so, come quickly, Lord Jesus. I mean, you understand what we're talking about, that you end up getting it, but it's really not what you thought it was going to be. Now, let me close this lesson by talking about the danger of reconciliation. She mentions that in verse 5. Again, this is something that's been brought up once before in chapter 2, when she makes this vow of saying, by the rows of the field, by the doe and by the hart, by we would say the buck and the doe. And it was some type of a vow that they would take upon them. Do not awaken love too early. Now, what she's referring to is, during these times of isolation, of separation, of loneliness, that you realize how special they are to you, and you want to rush back together into the relationship. It makes us very vulnerable that our emotions take control of our choices, our decisions. That's not a good way to make decisions. When you make emotional decisions, you will usually live to regret it. Yes, emotions are important, but emotions make wonderful servants and terrible masters. I've seen people that are controlled by their emotions, and they never live stable lives. They're always making foolish decisions because they're basing their decisions on their emotions rather than thinking it through and making rational decisions. So this is what she is saying. We must control our emotions and don't awaken love too early. She's saying, if you allow the emotion to take control, you will end up regretting the decisions that you make. I've seen it happen to too many people. And it always turns out something that they regret, something that they have to repent of, something they have to correct, something they have to try to make it right. And that's what she's warning. In the reconciliation process, we become very sensitive in our emotions. And if we're not controlled, if we're not careful, the emotions will take control of us, and we end up making the wrong kinds of decisions. And so I would caution every one of you, don't live that way. Now, I grew up in churches where we had a lot of emotional liberty. In fact, I didn't even think I was very spiritual as a young believer because I couldn't jump as high as some people. I couldn't dance the way they dance. I mean, their emotions, they were very good at expressing their emotional worship to God, and I just couldn't do it the way they did it. And I thought something was wrong with me until one day I discovered they are mistaking emotion for devotion. They're mistaking emotion for spirituality. There's a big difference. And so even in our relationships with each other, don't allow emotions to control your relationship. Rather, make decisions based upon what you have really thought through, what you want in your life. I pray that you have learned something on this lady that's had this bad dream that she awakens for another day. And may God bless you in your relationships with each other.